What is something that the Denver Broncos have to do more of as the rest of the season continues? 14 games left here, Broncos country. It ain't over till it's over, but Denver's got to do some things differently. We'll talk about that and much more on today's brand new episode of Good Morning Broncos. Good morning, Broncos country. Welcome into another episode of GMB, your daily bite-sized cup of coffee with Denver Broncos conversation and discussion here on Mile High Sports. Every team, every day. You love Broncos coverage. You love Abs coverage, Nuggets coverage, Rockies coverage. Subscribe down below so you never miss out on what we have going on here at Mile High Sports. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at Superbook Sports. Thank you so much for rocking with us here. But we got to break down some things here today as we go through. And now the Broncos shift their sights from the Miami debacle that was. Got to burn it, got to sage it, got to move on from it. You're now focused on the Chicago Bears. And for Denver, I think a lot of the conversation this week is players, are they going to dig deep down within themselves? Coaches, same thing. Are they going to dig deep down within and say, you know what? That's not who we are. That's not what we want to be defined as. And can they find a way to put one foot in front of the other, soul search, and wash away what was week 3 here? Because here's the thing. If you let something like week 3 linger, you let that type of defensive performance linger, it is going to impact the rest of your season. And if it leads into more losing, it could impact the morale inside the locker room. So it's a big week. Look, 3 weeks into the season, this is not where anybody expected the Denver Broncos to be. This is not where players expected to be. I can tell you this personally. Players inside that locker room, they're just as shocked, I think, as everybody else. Now, obviously, they've got to go out there. They've got to execute. They're on the field. They're making plays. Coaches have to coach. But the number one thing I think we always kind of lose sight of is that these guys care. It's not like they're just like, oh, gosh, I got to go to work today. Oh, I got to go play football. These guys love football. They live it, breathe it. And obviously, Sunday was embarrassing. But these guys, knowing these guys in the locker room, they have a lot of pride. They're going to go find a way to dig themselves out of the hole that unfortunately they're in here now at 0-3. Tough road test coming up a little bit against another 0-3 team, the Chicago Bears. Anytime you travel on the road, it's a tough matchup. Anytime you have the performance that you did this past week, it's a tough matchup here. And then the schedule doesn't get any easier for Denver. Look, you got the New York Jets next week. You got a Thursday night game after that on the road against Kansas City. You come back, you host Green Bay, you host the Kansas City Chiefs once again, then bang, it's the bye week. Week 9 is a bye. Denver could be 0-8 if they don't get things going. If they don't get a win this upcoming week, they don't show improvement on defense, they could very well enter the bye week at 0-9. And then week 10, guess what? It's a matchup on Monday Night Football against the Buffalo Bills. We know how tough that matchup's going to be as well. So Denver has no time to sit back and feel sorry for themselves. Dig deep within. This is the message of the week. Be resilient, right? Be resilient in nature. You can't change what happened, but you can change what you do going forward. And I think a lot of that locker room is going to encompass that. Look, the Broncos are back on the practice field here today at the Centura Health Training Center. I'm looking forward to getting out there and seeing where things are at here. We'll obviously have any kind of sound bites, some clips that we share that we get from post-practice locker room access, whatever it may be that's relevant to the conversation as we start to preview a little bit that Chicago Bears matchup. We'll get into the tail of the tape on tomorrow's episode of GMB here. But it's important, I think, that we acknowledge where this team is at. They're at 0-3. Nobody wanted this. Nobody expected this. But you know what? Nobody's going to feel sorry for the Denver Broncos. They've got to go out there and they've got to compete. They've got to fight and they've got to claw in order to get out of this 0-3 hole. And we might see them have a chance to do that here this week. But I think we also have to maybe factor in, how do you do that? Well, you got to do some things that are working for you here. And I think we can take a look here. Denver's offense really hasn't been their issue. Now, I think anybody's saying, I've seen a lot of people still bagging on Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's not the reason that they're 0-3. He certainly hasn't contributed to why they're 0-3. A lot of it's been the defense. A lot of it has just been the flow of the game. Like that first game against the Raiders was so weird because each team had 6 possessions. Russ was so efficient in that game. Can't hold that against him. Week 2, Russ was very efficient. Then they just opened it up and they went away from the run game with the 21-3 lead. Last week, Russ, I think, wheeled the Broncos into situations where they had a chance to compete early on. Unfortunately, you get a touchdown called back. It changes the outcome, the momentum of the game. The defense does get a stop on 4th down, and then the offense couldn't do anything because they have a penalty that sets them backward, and then they have to settle for a punt rather than a field goal that gives them at least some points against the Dolphins. But it didn't matter in that situation, right? Russell Wilson's going to be the easy narrative punching bag for so many angry Broncos fans, but the reality is if you're watching the games, you know Russell Wilson's not the problem here for Denver. And I don't know where we have to get to as a society to acknowledge that, hey, I get you may feel a certain way about Russell Wilson based on how he played last year, but that's not who Russell Wilson is this year. We're seeing a lot of the old school Seattle Seahawks Russell Wilson doing some of that good stuff there. And you know what I think the Broncos need to do a little bit more of here in order to get Russ and the offense just to continue on their pace here, but it be even better. Give Marvin Mims more snaps here. I mean, Broncos country against the Miami Dolphins. Granted, you're down. You're getting blown out in that game. Didn't matter because in the last 2 weeks, even though, hey, he had that 2-catch performance for 113 yards in week 2, he didn't see a single target in the second half. Marvin Mims is not getting very many snaps on the offensive side of the ball week in and week out. I mean, against the Dolphins, he had 15 total snaps. That equated to playing only 24% of the team's offensive snaps in that game. Why? The Broncos, Sean Payton, George Payton, they drafted Marvin Mims with the vision in their head that, hey, this is a guy who's explosive. He can be a big play guy for us downfield. He's got great ball tracking skills. He can be explosive in the return game. We've seen that. Week 2, 45-yard punt return. Week 3, last week, we saw a 99-yard kick return for a touchdown. He's been involved, and you can definitely see how special of a player he is. That's not even touching on the offensive side of the ball. We saw him, obviously, I just mentioned the week 2 performance there. We saw him last week, a couple downfield bombs there that he hauled in there from Russell Wilson. And my question is he's got legitimate game-breaking speed that if you put him out there on the field, defenses and defensive coordinators throughout the week when they're going through their game plan, they're sitting there and they're looking, okay, hey, most dangerous guys on the field. Okay, well, obviously Jerry Jeudy's very, very dangerous in terms of his route running ability. Cortland Sutton's got great size, but there's this guy here, number 19, that's got ridiculous speed. And if he gets behind our defense, we are in trouble because Russell Wilson, he's finding him. His deep ball accuracy this season is on point, but we're only seeing it for 15 snaps. To me, I think that speaks to a larger issue here. And look, I get it. Look, Brandon Johnson has stepped into the role of where Tim Patrick was supposed to play. But I want to preface this by saying when Brandon Johnson went down in training camp with the ankle injury that held him out for about 13 days, it was Marvin Mims stepping into that role. Let Marvin get on the field even more. And nothing against Brandon Johnson. I think Brandon Johnson can still contribute here for Denver. But you talk about putting Cortland Sutton with his size, Jerry Jeudy with his route running prowess, and Marvin Mims with his game-breaking speed ability. You're telling me that isn't going to open up or maybe force defenses to play you a little bit differently? Like, come on. And here's also the other thing. Denver's run game is going. Denver has been very successful running the ball inside the season. The only problem is they abandoned it in week 2. Last week, you can't continue sticking with the run game, even though Javonte and Samaje were having some pretty solid runs in that game. You cannot stick with it simply because of the fact that you're down by 3 scores. You're going to run more time off the clock, and it's going to prohibit you from being able to capitalize on scoring opportunities, let alone you already know your defense isn't getting any stops. Denver cannot abandon the run game in this game. I think ideally, too, we can even talk about this. Denver has won each of the coin toss through the first 3 weeks of the season. They've deferred to the second half. You know what the Broncos should start doing? They should start receiving the ball to open up the game if they win the coin toss. Who cares about the second half? Because obviously that's been an issue for them here. Get the ball, score points, and then you know what? If your defense gets a stop, maybe you get another touchdown. Maybe it gives you a 2-score advantage at that, at that standpoint there. That's what we have to see here for this Broncos team is just there's got to be a commitment to doing the things that are working. Marvin Mims is working here for this Denver offense, but they're simply not sticking with it consistently enough. To me, I think that speaks to a little bit of a bigger problem, and maybe it's a trust factor. Look, Marvin's a young guy, but Marvin's smart. Marvin's a terrific player. His college production speaks for itself there. But when you look at where Sean Payton's at in his experience as a head coach, I get it. There might be some hesitation trusting so much to a rookie player, but you drafted him in the second round. You've put a lot of trust in him. He's proven to be a producer. There's some things he's going to learn along the way, but you got to let him also make mistakes along the same way as well. Brandon Johnson can still contribute in a role, even if Marvin Mims is a little bit more featured than he is. I'm not saying that Denver is in a position right now where it's like, all right, well, you know what? We're just going to throw out the Ferrari every once in a while. I mean, Marvin Mims is always in line every game to have a big play for Denver. And so far, look, I saw a statistic out there in terms of the Broncos' top 10 biggest gains this season. Marvin Mims has 8 of the 10. Brandon Johnson has the 50-yard catch for a Hail Mary that counts as one of them. So when you look at it, Marvin Mims has been the Broncos player that's been getting the most yard production this season, whether it's in the return game, whether it's on an end around in the run game, or whether it's even in the receiving game. He's been that guy that's been making plays. So for me, I'm very, very perplexed as to why we have not seen more Marvin Mims. That Broncos need to figure out a way to get him more touches, get him more snaps. He deserves it. If Tyreek Hill can play the entire game with his speed, threat, and dynamic, Marvin Mims is a guy that you want to put out there to strike fear in defensive corners. Like, you play us too tightly, we're going to burn you here. Denver's got the personnel to make it happen. So why aren't we seeing that? To me, that's a question I want to throw out to you. If you're watching along here, let us know your thoughts on this morning's episode of Good Morning Broncos. We're going to continue some other things here as well. I want to talk about some narratives about George Payton that we're seeing here from a lot of angry Broncos fans. I want to talk about what they need from the defensive line. We're going to get that on today's episode of GMB. Real quick, let me tell you about Superbook Sports, the sponsor of today's episode of the show. Why bet with the big boys this football season? Instead, try your hand with the local book. That's Superbook Sports this fall. Superbook Sports is the book next door, just a dedicated team of the best odds makers in Las Vegas, making sure that you get the best prices and parlays anywhere. And now, Superbook will give you a bonus of up to $250 when you sign up and wager on the same day and use the promo code MILEHIGH. So bet with the best. Use promo code MILEHIGH this football season with Superbook Sports. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, Broncos country, let's continue on the rest of the show here today. Good Morning Broncos on Mile High Sports YouTube page. If you want to stay in tune with what's going on daily over there at Mile High Sports, go to milehighsports.com. I have you covered with what's going on in practice, what we're hearing from players, game recaps, game previews, so much more. You get all those stories there, milehighsports.com. Plus, we have some other Colorado sports starting up soon with the Denver Nuggets season a little bit later on in October. The Colorado Avalanche are in preseason play, so you can check out all the coverage there from Arif Dean at milehighsports.com here. But let's continue on here today. I've seen a lot of narratives in the last couple of days here since the Broncos' big-time defeat on the road against the the Miami Dolphins. I mean, it's kind of like a carbon copy of the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel played in the same system, same scheme. They coached together. We might see that as the Super Bowl this year. But no, after the big blowout loss to the Miami Dolphins, I'm seeing a lot of anger directed at George Payton. Now, let me preface this by saying, okay, George Payton is the general manager of the Denver Broncos. He's been with the team. This is his 30 years GM, okay? And I feel like a lot of the unfair narratives that we're seeing pushed on him, I think, lack a lot of context about it. George Payton, I felt like through the draft, his first draft, I think he nailed it. His draft class, he nailed it out of the park with the guys that they got. They had an over 50% hit rate on those guys. And then obviously, you know, he made the hire of Nathaniel Hackett. Okay, look, yes, George Payton is going to take responsibility of that, but what a rough position for him to have to be in. And yeah, he should have given guys like Mike McDaniel an interview. He settled for Nathaniel Hackett. They were hoping they could lure Aaron Rodgers to Denver. It didn't work out. It came back to bite them in the tail here. Denver had no ownership in place. Joe Ellis was stepping away from the game. So he had to hire a head coach. And yeah, he made the wrong decision there. But I think that's one of the bigger reasons he gets crucified on social media and by fans is George Payton, when he took over for John Elway, he inherited the roster that John Elway had built from that point and had assembled. And there was a lot of stuff he's had to deal with in the meantime in terms of cleaning up some of that stuff there, in terms of John Elway's final back-end years with the team. And then all of a sudden, it's like, you know, he goes and he nails his first draft. There's great. In free agency, he goes and he gets a couple of guys that contributed. I mean, I think K'Wan Williams is hurt right now. K'Wan Williams was an excellent signing for him. Obviously, the Broncos are missing his presence on the field. He helped extend a guy like Justin Simmons, which that was much needed. I mean, I don't know if that would have happened under John Elway. I don't know if John Elway would have gotten Justin Simmons a contract extension. We have seen historically John Elway be stubborn and extending key players there. A lot of it was money tight there, but George Payton values the really good players that Denver does have on the team here. Yeah, the hire of Hackett is a blemish there. He's also getting blamed a lot for Russell Wilson getting a contract extension before he even played a single snap with Denver. And I want to tell you this, folks, right? I think it's easy to say, oh, there's a name. Let's point our finger at it. Let's blame. It's all his fault. The Walton Penner family ownership group stepped in and took control of the Denver Broncos in August of last year. They haven't had a lot of hands-on NFL experience guiding and navigating a franchise. George Payton was a little bit of a whipping boy, you know, in terms of what had happened there. I mean, he was kind of hung out to dry in public there and like, hey, this is embarrassing. This isn't the standard we want for our team. And yeah, he kind of took a ringing from Greg Penner because of that. But here's the reality of the situation. The Walton Penner family ownership group wanted the Broncos to get ahead on getting a Russell Wilson contract extension done because what, folks? Because Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and Justin Herbert, these were three quarterbacks that were set to get new contracts that because of their young stature and their production so far in their early careers was going to reset the quarterback market in a big way. Now, prior to all that, Aaron Rodgers had reset the quarterback market. He was the highest paid quarterback at that point in time before they did the Russell Wilson deal. Then Russell Wilson elevated and took it over. Denver tried to get ahead of it before you could let Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, or Justin Herbert set the market at an even higher value. It's getting ahead of it. And granted, look, it is a tough gamble to give a guy a contract extension before he's played a single snap. I mean, I think maybe the tune would have changed if Denver would have waited until after last year to do it. Yeah, I can see it. But then Russell Wilson could have also just left after the season, could have gone elsewhere. Like he would have had suitors if that was the case. Going into last season, nobody knew the season would be as disastrous as it was. So I think a lot of times the emotion of the subject clouds our ability to think logically about what has happened here in Denver. Has George Payton been perfect? No. George Payton has his fair share of responsibility. But you know what George Payton's job is as a general manager? And this is something that he did from day one when he came in, when Vic Fangio was the head coach and John Elway stepped away. It was Vic, Pat Shurmur, what do you guys need this season in order to be successful from a roster standpoint? Pat Shurmur said, we got to get rid of Phillip Lindsay. He's not a fit for what we want to do. So he did that. George Payton did right by Phillip Lindsay by allowing him to be able to become a free agent, to go test elsewhere versus just trading him to a place where maybe he didn't want to end up. That hasn't worked out, obviously, for Phillip Lindsay. Now he's in media, and which is awesome. I mean, Phil's a great player. He's a great guy, but unfortunately, the NFL is not valuing a lot of those smaller backs that just don't have the ability to be a consistent pass catcher out of the backfield here. Nothing against Phil. Phil is a terrific player, the heart of a lion. But a lot of people are like up in arms about George Payton, helping facilitate releasing a guy like Phillip Lindsay. It's tough there. And then, an argument I see consistently used against George Payton is, well, he traded all these picks for Russell Wilson. Folks, do we have to hit the pause button here? Like, why do we always have to live in revisionist history on subject matters? Why do we always have to use hindsight when talking about something, right? Because the conversation when George Payton was trying to get a quarterback for Denver, the conversation was, well, Denver's just a quarterback away. They get a franchise quarterback. They got an elite defense. They're going to be Super Bowl contenders. So you know what? He goes out there and he orchestrates a trade for Russell Wilson, and Seattle wanted a boatload for it. And obviously they got it, right? But I remember when that trade happened, I remember interacting with fans. I remember getting fan feedback. They're like, build a statue for George Payton outside of Empower Field a Mile High right now. That is exactly the conversation that was going on. But because the season was an abject failure and a disaster last year, the tone and the narrative toward George Payton has soured here a little bit. No one's absolving George Payton from any responsibility, but I think a lot of the anger and hostility and get rid of George Payton that we're seeing in all the comments, I think it's a little unwarranted in a sense. His job is to give coaches whatever they need. And unfortunately, you know what? Him trading for Russell Wilson, the Broncos struggled in the draft to get guys in the first round because of obviously their positioning here. They obviously had second round picks, but they were able, I think, to do a lot in terms of getting some young talent in this year's NFL draft, considering the limited minimal picks that they do have here. I think George Payton and Sean Payton can do a lot of great things together. I really do. I think from George Payton's background as a scout and his knowledge of the game, I think his respected relationship with executives around the NFL, I think that's going to help. And I think with Sean Payton, it can kind of help bridge the gap a little bit because, hey, Sean Payton, well respected as a coach, maybe doesn't have the best reputation in the eyes of a lot of people around the NFL, right? Because of some very public, outspoken comments. He's been very vocal against a guy like Roger Goodell. And so Sean Payton feels like there's a target on his back. George Payton is a guy that can help alleviate that a little bit because of how well respected he is and the work that he puts in with the pro personnel and the scouting department to go out there and scout players. Denver hasn't been in a position in years to where they're really in a prime position to pick. Now, obviously, if they would have had their picks, last year they would have had a top 5 pick, based on how they finished the season. But that wasn't the case, right? And we can get mad about that all we want, but I think we got to use logic here when talking about the direction of this Denver Broncos team. They have a first-round pick this year. They have their first-round picks next year. Denver could receive trade calls at the deadline. George Payton, in my opinion, is not the fall guy, should not be the fall guy for what has happened here. The Broncos, if they embrace a rebuild, they need to do it with George Payton and Sean Payton collaboratively together here. That's the one way I think it's going to work because of the things that I mentioned in the background here. So let's just put kind of logic to some narratives that we've seen so far floated out there. While George Payton isn't absolved from any blame, he obviously shares responsibility. This is his 3rd year as the GM of the team here. I think he's done a lot more to put Denver on a good trajectory with young players and development. That's a huge emphasis under him. And with Sean Payton as the head coach, I think the Broncos will get to where they want to be. It's not an overnight thing. It's not a one-year thing. This takes time. And I think that these are the two guys, when you talk about a brain trust of personnel and football, these two guys are going to get a lot done for Denver if you have faith and you have patience with it. But I'd be very curious to see how things go and navigate through the rest of the way here. But Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of GMB. Let me know your thoughts on the subject matter below. You can always get involved with the show. You ever want to share your thoughts. You have a question for our mailbag next week. Cody at milehighsports.com is a way that you can reach me. I've had some people email me just to share their general thoughts on the team. You're more than welcome to do that. I appreciate it. I welcome it. And also, we'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of Good Morning Broncos.